Hello, this is Chuck Carnevale, co-founder of FastGraphs. It is my extreme pleasure to present this introductory video on how to navigate our new improved version of our historical FastGraphs fundamental research tool. Our new version of the historical earnings and price correlated graphs still perform and function as they always have. However, we have added several enhancements. One of the most important ones is that we have moved much of the functionality into the body of the graph. You will still have to use the navigation bar to the left to change from earnings options, from adjusted, for example, to cash flow. But for the most part, most of the actual functionality of the graphs is now included within the graph itself. One of the most exciting aspects of our new graphs is we've added the ability to change from one time frame to the next internally in the graph now. And to do that, all you have to do is point to a year at the top and you get an instant change of the graph. So you can go from 10 years to 15 years to 5 years in an instant now. No more waiting for a new set of graphs to load. So navigation is easy. You just simply point at whatever year you choose. Now it's important to recognize when you're looking at a 16-year graph, that includes 2 years of forecast, the current year you're in and 1 year forward, and therefore it'll only be 14 years of actual forecast, or history. A couple of other quick enhancements. The graphs are still produced in calendar year format. However, the fiscal years are now listed at the bottom of the graph. Johnson & Johnson happens to have a 12/31 fiscal year, but if it was a May fiscal year, it would be listed here at the bottom of the graph. So you now immediately can see what the company's fiscal year ended. Another way that you can look at historical time frames, you'll notice this graph here at the bottom of the graph mirrors what you see up here from an earnings point of view. There are two toggle bars here. If you wanted to look at a period of historical time, for example, just by moving the scroll bars, I have now brought up 2004 to 2009. So if you want to review a historical time frame, it's very easy to do now. And if you want to reset the graphs, you simply re-click the All button, and then that'll allow you to go back and focus in on whatever time frame you choose to focus on. Notice that each time that I change the time frame, the data is recalculated in the FastFacts box. So if I go to a 12-year, you'll notice that the normal PE, the growth rate, and of course the formula will automatically change as you move from one time frame to the next. Another enhancement that we think you'll find very attractive is a lot of subscribers have asked for a dividend yield. The legend at the bottom of the graph is also interactive now. And there's a grade legend here. If you point to that and bring up dividend yield, it will automatically place the company's dividend yield. It's actually, in essence, creating a separate graph, even though it's posting it on the same graph. And what you see then is an interest rate scale. And this actually becomes another valuation measurement. As you can see, when Johnson & Johnson's price was below the orange line or at fair value, was also simultaneous when their dividend yield was highest. And if you look at it longer term, when Johnson & Johnson was very overvalued back in the mid-90s, you can see that the dividend yield was very lower. So it presents another valuation metric. And you can turn it on and off just by clicking the word. Stock splits have also been added. As you can see, Johnson & Johnson has had 6 stock splits. But if you just click the word splits, it will actually post them on the graph and give you the date when the split occurred, which is another feature that we feel is very exciting. An additional enhancement on the graph has to do with the pop-ups. If you look at a historical time frame, for example, here in 2005 when Johnson & Johnson was overpriced, when you point to that price point, it now also includes the price-earnings ratio that the company was trading at. For example, March 31st, 2005, Johnson & Johnson was trading at $67.16 or a PE ratio of 21. We've also added a very simple yet powerful calculator function that you can calculate performance over any time period that you choose in the graph. For example, if I wanted to see what happened when Johnson & Johnson was overvalued in April of 2005, I would just simply click that point. And if I wanted to see what performance that was at the throes or the worst period during the Great Recession, I can click again and a pop-up will come up and it will give you the information, a performance calculation on what happened during that time frame. So from April 29th, 05 to February 27th, 09, Johnson & Johnson went from $68 a share to $50 a share. That resulted in $18.63 of price depreciation for a capital total capital depreciation of 27.5%. However, Johnson & Johnson raised their dividend every year. You would have picked up $6.03 of prorated dividends for a total loss of $12.60. That would be a total rate of return of minus 18.36% or minus 5.15% total annualized rate of return or rate of loss. This function also allows you to look at the effects of valuation. For example, had you bought Johnson & Johnson again when it was fully valued back in April of 2005 and held it till today, you can see you would have still generated a positive rate of return and accumulated significant amounts of dividends. So you could say you can't really overpay for Johnson & Johnson as long as you're willing to hold. On the other hand, if you were patient and waited until Johnson & Johnson came into fair value in July of 2007, you would see that your annual rate of return would have expanded to over 9%. Of course, you'd have accumulated less dividend because you wouldn't have owned the stock as long. The point is, you can run these calculations now, freely and easily just by pointing from one dot to the next. Finally, another enhancement we've added is, as I mentioned earlier, the legend is actually active. For example, I've often written about and talked about, looking at a company without having a contamination of stock price. So you can just click on these words and take the graphs apart. Right here I'm looking at earnings and dividends only. If I wanted to look at earnings only, I would simply click off dividends. If I want to add any of these things back to the graph, I just simply re-click it again, and they're automatically drawn back to the graph. And again, I can go through time frames just virtually on the fly and literally evaluate what's happening over different time frames almost as fast as I can think. In summary, we've moved much of the functionality from the navigation bar into the graph itself. As you get used to using the graph, the new version of the graph, I encourage you just to go ahead and point and click. Don't be afraid. You can't break it. Just, point to any spot on the graph. Point to the years up here, and it'll become very intuitive, we believe, that you'll be able to do whatever you want to with these graphs. And if you get lost in the middle, you can always click the all button and it'll return it back to its normal form. Again, you can take the graphs apart. You can look at the company strictly from a standpoint of price and normal PE. You can look at it, with earnings or without. You can look at it with dividends or out, and you can literally take it apart and put it back together. And then you've now had the addition of this new dividend yield. Just have fun and play with it now, and I think you'll enjoy the speed and the functionality that this new, improved historical graph provides. I appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing to improve our fast graphs to the benefit of our subscribers' ability to analyze stocks deeper, faster, more efficiently, and quicker. Thank you.